Hey, what's going on my friends? Hope you're all doing absolutely fantastic, and today we're actually got 10 tips with your Sony A7IV camera that you probably don't know. Some of them you might actually know, but some of them you might be like, oh wow, I didn't know my camera actually did this. And I know there are a lot of users out there that just bought the Sony FX30 and also the Sony A7 IV, and they're pretty much new to the whole Sony system, and these things are pretty interesting tips and tricks, and there could be a whole bunch of things in here that you didn't actually know existed and could actually help you in your workflow and actually create better work. So let's get into the top 10 tips. And this video is actually sponsored by Squarespace, so thank you to them for bringing this video to you guys, and obviously this is going to help so many people. We'll talk about Squarespace later on. Let's get into this video. So number one is S&Q mode. Now I know a lot of you guys know what S&Q mode, but there are some people out there that don't actually know what S&Q mode is. Now S&Q is essentially Sony's slow and quick. You can actually do slow motion in there, but there is no audio as well, and it is a lower bit rate because it's not recording the audio, and the image quality still seems pretty decent. You just have to remember that the slow motion will be baked in, so when you review it in your camera, it'll actually appear slower. So you can do from, I think in the FX30, you can actually do from 240 frames per second in HD. You can do 100 frames per second, obviously 200 frames per second if you're in PAL. You can go all the way down to 1 frames per second, which we'll talk about in a sec, but S&Q mode is really good feature to start utilizing to get better slow motion. Now, the A7 IV only does 4K at 60 frames per second, and it is 1.5 times crop, but if you do want 120 frames or 100 frames per second in HD, you do actually have to go to S&Q mode, which will give you 10-bit color. Now, if you utilize 1080p in, I think it is XAVCS, this will only give you 8-bit color. So to actually access the 10-bit color, you actually have to utilize S&Q mode. Now with the Sony FX30, to obviously utilize slow motion and that 240 frames per second, you do obviously have to put it into HD, then go into your S&Q mode and set it to 240 frames per second, or if you're in PAL region, it's 200 frames per second. Now don't forget, when it is slow motion, you still have to have twice your frame rate when it comes to your shutter speed. So if you are in 240 frames per second, your shutter speed should be 1/500th of a second. This will ensure that your slow motion and your motion blur is correct and the most natural motion blur you can get. And just remember, you have to be sure to click it into S&Q mode as well. So go into your settings or go into the top dial, flick it into S&Q. Otherwise, all the settings you have done will not apply. Now, number two is actually time-lapse, and a lot of people don't know that you can actually do time-lapse in camera when it comes to the video side. So all you need to do is go into that S&Q mode as well and go down to your time-lapse, and you can put up to 1 frame per second. Now this is extremely useful if you want to do a full time-lapse in video mode and it actually be time-lapsed in camera. Otherwise, your older version of time-lapse is literally take a shot every single second or every 3 seconds, and then you have to bring it into your post-production, edit it, and put it all together into a video. It is time consuming, and I know there are other processes out there, but this is the easiest and quickest way to just get a regular time-lapse in camera that will probably only be used, for 5 to 6 seconds of a YouTube video or a professional video, whatever it is. It is so basic. And the great thing about this one is with this time lapse, you can actually have a 1-second shutter. Now, the biggest thing about a 1-second shutter is that your motion blur is going to be really good, because essentially the camera is going to take a shot, because essentially the camera is going to open up the shutter to increase the amount of motion blur, but this is going to increase the amount of light that's going to your sensor. So you would either A, have to have a really strong ND filter, or pair that with a really small aperture. So bring the aperture to like f22 or whatever your camera can do, or whatever your lens can do, and that's going to cut back on the light, because opening up that shutter is going to increase more light with that one. Now, number two is clear image zoom. This is absolutely massive with the Sony A7 IV and the FX30 because they are actually higher resolution sensors. The A7 IV is a 7K sensor, whereas the FX30 is a 6K sensor. that downsample into 4K, and this allows you to do clear image zoom. Sure, the FX6 can actually do clear image zoom. It's only a 4K sensor, but I think the processor is a little bit different when it comes to the FX30, the FX3 and the A7S3. Those two cameras cannot do clear image zoom. But if you are utilizing any alpha cameras that's full frame, they're generally downsampled sensors, and you can actually utilize clear image zoom. Now I have this programmed to one of my programmable buttons, so all I need to do is click into it and then use the scroll wheel to zoom in or zoom out. The great thing about the FX30 is that it has the zoom rocker on the front. So instead of having a zoomable lens, you can program this to be clear image zoom and punch in by 1.5 times. The great thing about this is that it'll still put out a 4K image, but it will actually be a much clearer image in post-production. So if you're wanting to punch in post, and you know you're gonna be punching in post, you could actually utilize clear image zoom to punch in the camera. And then when it comes to post, it's actually going to be a little bit clearer, and you're pretty much going to be the same composition as what you wanted. So this could be a really good option. Now, the biggest thing when it does come to utilizing clear image zoom is that you lose your autofocus capabilities. You can actually have regular autofocus, but you cannot do eye autofocus and you cannot do object tracking. So you do have to take that into consideration, because sometimes eye autofocus and face tracking or object tracking is actually more important than just trying to get a little bit more zoom. But you know, if you can, buy a zoom lens, but if you can't, and you need a little bit more zoom, clear image zoom is there for you guys to use. So, like I said earlier, this is actually brought to you by Squarespace. This is an all-in-one platform that helps build your brand and grow your business online. This is where you can stand out with a beautiful website to engage in your audience and sell pretty much anything, your products, your content you create, even your time. One of the greatest things that I actually love about Squarespace is integrating all my professional videos on this website. So I actually have them all uploaded to my YouTube in an unlisted category and then link them to my website. You can actually do this with Vimeo as well. And this is how I actually display a lot of my professional work. And if a lot of clients actually want to try and reach out, I link them to my website and then they can actually go through what I actually do as a company. And one of the greater things when it comes to actually making some money is you can actually have an online store. So this is where I sell my LUTs. This is where I have my one-on-one consults with all my clients as well. So it is really good to have an online platform where you can sell and have an online shop, an all-in-one. It's just super easy, not complex at all. So you can pretty much save 10% off your first purchase when it comes to Squarespace. Just use my link in the description below or squarespace.com/Jason Morris. This is going to help my channel out and obviously help you guys out when it comes to purchasing your first Squarespace. So thank you for Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and let's get back into these tips. Now, number 4 is an interesting one, and it's one that I completely forgot to do in my camera when I had the A7R5, and that is adjusting the IBIS. Now, when I mean adjusting the IBIS, this is specifically for manual focus lenses. Now, the IBIS works with the lens. So the lens is actually telling the camera what lens you got, and it's going to be correcting the IBIS, obviously due to that focal length. And let's say you have a 70 to 200 millimeter lens and you're at 200 millimeters. That is extremely zoomed in. So when you actually have some small micro jitters in your hands, there's going to be more camera shake because it's a longer focal length, and essentially it's compressing the image, thus making it look like the shake is obviously more. But the lens is actually telling the camera, hey, I'm at 200 millimeters, so make the IBIS work a little bit harder because I'm at 200 millimeters. And that's what it actually does. And when it's back down to 70, it changes the way that the IBIS works because it's much wider. It doesn't have to work as hard to stabilize. And this is one thing that you have to change when it comes to manual lenses. So if you have a 50 millimeter manual lens on the front, you have to go into your IBIS settings and tell the camera that you've got a 50 millimeter lens. This is definitely when it comes to wider lenses as well. You're going to get some really weird overcorrection and warpiness going on. I had this with the DZO Catazoom lens on the A7R5 because I forgot to adjust it. I think I kept it at 80 millimeters, but because it's a cinema zoom lens, I zoomed out to 35 millimeters and I was getting some crazy warping and it did not look pretty at all. Now, number 5 is USB-C streaming. This is amazing when it comes to the newer Sony cameras. A7 IV, the FX30 does it as well. This is great. All you need to do is plug directly into the USB-C on the side of your camera, directly into your computer, and it will say, hey, do you want to connect to PC? And you say yes. So you can literally use your camera for Zoom calls, you can use it for live YouTube, Twitch streaming, all those kind of platforms when it comes to online streaming. It is phenomenal. You don't need any other software, you don't need OBS, you don't need some sort of capture card or anything. Just plug and play directly into there. So you can really up your Zoom game or your one-on-one Zoom calls, whatever it is, with your A7 IV and your FX30. It is so good. And you can also utilize a microphone on top of that, and you're gonna get much better audio when it comes to that. Just make sure you select it in your Zoom software or whatever software you're utilizing as well. Now, number 6 is one thing that I use a lot, and I definitely recommend to program this to a specific button, and that is focus magnifier. Now, if you are an avid manual focus user, trying to just hit that spot is really important. And focus peaking you should always have on, and there's different types of sensitivities on focus peaking. That's a whole nother video, but that's definitely a really good thing when it comes to manual focus. But focus magnifier essentially just gives a little optical zoom in, and then you can pretty much tap it again and it will zoom in again, and then you can just do some critical focusing and trying to nail that focus, especially if you are doing some product videography, those kind of things, or even just something as simple as filming someone in a static position. You really want to get tack sharp on their eyes with a manual focus lens. Using focus magnifier is an extremely good thing. You just keep punching in, and just try and find that perfect focus point when it comes to zooming, and then you just tap it again and it zooms out, hit record, and you're sweet. Now, going on to that focus magnifier, and a different way of focusing with the A7 IV and also the FX30 is focus mapping. I use this a lot. Specifically, if I am in a pinch, I've actually programmed this to the trash can button. Now, focus mapping is some weird looking color scheme when it tells you what's in focus and what's out of focus. But trust me, this is extremely useful because I do a lot of manual focusing when it comes to products and all those kind of things on this channel. And the focus magnifier sometimes isn't amazing. Sometimes the peaking, it doesn't look like it's tack sharp. When you put focus magnifier on, you can actually see what is in focus, because what's in focus will actually be clear. What's out of focus will either be blue, which is in front, or red, which is behind. I think that's the way, but red, blue. But if it's clear, it's good to go. It's a game changer. It's an absolute game changer, and I really think all cameras should have this. And I'm not sure why the FX6 doesn't have it. I really don't know why the FX6 doesn't have it. But hey, the FX30's got it, and the A7 IV has it as well. Now, this only does work with selected Sony lenses as well, and if you have a manual lens, this doesn't work with manual lenses because it needs that control pin on the back, and that's how it actually talks with the lenses, and you're able to get the focus mapping. Now, number 8 is massive, and specifically if you don't have a powerful computer, this is really important, and that is creating proxies. Now, I know you can go into Media Encoder and create proxies through that, and if you don't know what proxies are, essentially they're a smaller resolution file of the main file. So you can pretty much edit with those proxies. Make sure those proxies are, completely edited, because it will, play back on your computer nice and smooth. You don't have any playback issues. You don't have any editing issues. And all you need to do is click a button on your editing software and it'll switch over to the main file, and then you can export it. It's perfectly fine. This is a massive one when it comes to increasing workflow. And I can't remember what brand does it, but you can actually utilize proxies and send them to another company, and they can start editing right away. And then when you get to the studio and upload all the footage, all they need to do is click the button, and essentially they can edit the whole project with all the proxies. And then you've got the main footage at the end, and you export the main footage. So it can actually increase massive amounts of workflow with bigger crews, not just individuals. But hey, if you are an individual, check your camera and see if your camera can record proxies, because it could be as small as a 720 file. Any computer can pretty much handle a proxy, and then switch it over right at the end when you're just about to export. It makes it so much easier. But hey, with all these M1 chips and M2 chips with the Macs coming out these days, you can pretty much edit everything. But my computer's getting to that point where it's really struggling on some footage. So I might have to start thinking about proxy workflow, or just getting a new computer. I don't know. And number 9 is an interesting one, and it's one that I've been using for a few months now, and that is the MI shoe. So that is the multi-interface shoe that a lot of the newer Sony cameras have. The FX30, the A7IV, and the FX6 even has it now. A7S3, the FX3. The multi-interface shoe essentially allows you to utilize the ECM B1M or the B10, which is a cordless microphone. Essentially, it passes the digital signal directly through your hot shoe into your camera, so you don't actually have to plug into your microphone jack, which is amazing. You don't have to worry about cords, you don't have to worry about turning it on, and being a digital signal, it's actually cleaner. And number 10 is setting that auto power off temp to high. Now, I know a lot of people were having overheating issues on the A7IV, but you just need to select the over temp heating to high, because it does come in the camera as standard. With the FX30, when starting it up, it actually gives you an option to switch that over temp heat to high straight from the get-go, because all the Sony cameras overheat. The A7S3 will overheat, the FX3 will overheat if you do not turn it off onto high. You have to have it on high. And Sony actually do recommend this, and it will not wreck the camera unless you're constantly making the camera, putting the camera in an oven. If you're constantly putting it in an oven, maybe eventually, I don't know. There has been no anecdotal evidence that the cameras will completely shut down. There's been no statements with Sony saying that the cameras will wreck if you have this set to high. Look, if they didn't want your cameras to wreck, they wouldn't have this setting in the camera. It's even in the cameras such as the A7 III. You just have to dig deep into the settings and turn that to high as well, so you don't actually have any overheating issues. But anyway, guys, I hope you found this video useful, and that is my 10 tips on some of the settings you may not actually know. But if you did find this useful, give it a thumbs up. That'd be absolutely amazing. Subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. And if you want to support my channel, links in the description below of my LUTs, and you can check out Epidemic Sound, Squarespace, and all those kind of things that I'm kind of affiliated with. And yeah, I hope you guys have a good day. I'll see you in the next one. All right, let's get it.